What if being the strong one was never actually your personality? What if being incredibly capable, emotionally intuitive, independent, responsible, and good at anticipating everyone else's needs was something you learned? And what if somewhere along the way, being needed became intertwined with being loved? And what happens when that little girl who learned to monitor everyone else's emotional world grows into the woman who still feels responsible for everyone else's sanity, making sure everyone else is okay? Today we're going to go there. We're talking about the oldest daughter. We're talking about parentification and the psychology of becoming the responsible one. As the oldest parentified daughter, I am going to share some of my experience in this, as well as what science is backing and how our nervous system responds when this occurs in your world. The nervous system that learns to scan before it rests, that body that says yes before you've even had a chance to feel your own no. We're going to talk about what happens when these patterns become so familiar that you stop recognizing them as adaptations and start calling them who I am. It's just who I am. And we're also going to look at this through 3 different lenses. So we're going to look at this through psychology, somatics, and shamanic understanding of inherited patterns and energetic entanglement. I'm also going to be sharing my views on this personally in some stories. So today we're going to dive in. I'm going to be really clear about what science can tell us and what we're still learning and where we're stepping into a traditional or spiritual framework rather than making a scientific claim. Because for me personally, I don't want spirituality to replace psychology. And I think it's really an interesting world because now we are able to weave these 2 things together. And spirituality, what I believe spirituality is your own individual journey, is something that we also need to hold reverence for. We have to respect it as well, because these traditions, these teachings, these ways of moving through life are ancient. They are something that's been here since pretty much day one, and psychology is more of a new science. So I want them to be able to sit at the same table. And so if you're the woman who can hold everyone together but secretly doesn't know how to let yourself fall apart or doesn't feel safe enough to let yourself fall apart, if you're the one that everyone is coming to, if you can sense the mood of a room before anyone speaks, if asking for help feels strangely uncomfortable, or even resting feels guilty, you have that mom guilt or just that guilt of not doing, then you might want to stick around and stay with me, because this episode may change the way you understand the woman you've had to become. So let's get comfy cozy, grab a blanket, get comfortable. If you're on your walk, welcome, and let's dive in. So let's start with a distinction, because being the oldest daughter does not automatically mean you were parentified. I want to make that really clear. Having responsibilities as a child isn't inherently harmful either. There is very much a difference between being given age-appropriate responsibility and being placed in a role that belongs to an adult. In psychology, parentification refers to a child taking on developmentally inappropriate parental or adult responsibilities. That can be practical, or it can look like maybe you were cooking and caring for siblings or managing the household at a really young age before you were mentally and emotionally and physically ready to do so. But there's also another form that I think many women might recognize immediately, and that is emotional parentification. You become the confidant, the mentor, the emotional support, the one who knows when mom is overwhelmed, when dad needs to keep calm, or you're the one who doesn't want to add another problem to the docket, right? Maybe you're the one who just knows that now's not a good time to ask, or mom needs me, dad's upset, don't make this worse. And here's where the psychology gets pretty interesting. So A very large systemic review looking at 95 studies found that parentification can have both a positive and negative consequence. So some people develop genuine coping skills and resilience, while parentification, particularly emotional parentification, has also been associated with internalizing difficulties and compromising well-being. And I'll put the link to that study in the show notes today as well if you want to take more of a look into that. So here's what I want to share is that I'm not here to tell you that everything good about you is actually trauma. No, your competence is real, your empathy is real, your resilience is very real. But the question is, did you get to choose those qualities, or did you have to develop them to function inside your family structure? And these are two very different questions. So maybe take a pause and ask yourself, what are my qualities? What is it that I have strengths in? Am I extremely competent? Am I resilient? And ask yourself, did I develop these qualities to survive in my home, or did I develop them in a way that was healthy and really serves me in my life right here, right now, and today? So take a moment and take a reflection. So as we move forward, you might want to have a notebook handy. You might want to open the notes app. You might want to check in with yourself. And again, like any podcast, take what I'm saying as a grain of salt. Whatever sticks, wonderful. What doesn't, that's okay. So I want you to take a moment and imagine you're the little girl or the little boy that, has learned to really read the room. She doesn't have the language for nervous system regulation, right? You're too young to know that. You do not have or know what hypervigilance is. What you do know as that little girl or little boy is that I need to know what's happening around me. You have that awareness that you have to know what's happening around you to maybe feel safe, to maybe be one step ahead, to maybe diffuse situations. So you start watching. You watch facial expressions, you watch tone of voice, you listen to the cadence of footsteps, maybe coming up the stairs. Maybe you listen for the silence, the door slams, the breathing. You become incredibly good at detecting changes in other people. And here's the important piece. That can become a very useful adaptation. And if knowing the emotional climate helps you navigate your environment, your brain and body have a reason to keep doing it. So the adult, woman or man, might walk into a room and immediately think, oh, something's off. Right? You might not even know that you're doing this consciously. You're just simply noticing now. But your body has already started to gather this information. This is where I want to bring in the somatic piece, because your body isn't separate from your psychological experience. They're really interwoven. So interconception is about the ability to sense and interpret signals from inside the body. Things like your heart rate, your breathing, your gastrointestinal sensations, right? That's tummy clenching, that tightness, that rumbling, and other psychological states. And research is increasingly linking interception with emotional awareness and regulation. So when we're doing somatic work, we're not saying every sensation in your body is a message from your trauma. No, that's way too simplistic, and it's not really accurate. We are learning to become curious, right? That is the key. And you'll hear me in all of my work. And if you're ever in a one-on-one session with me where we do the untangling, is this trauma? Is this what I began to develop for survival? Is this even mine? Where does this come from? And we get to the root. And the one word I use over and over again is let's get curious. Let's get curious about the relationship between the sensation, the interpretation, the emotion, impulse, and response. And being able to sit with that, being able to like put on your Nancy Drew hat or the Hardy Boys, and I'm aging myself now, and being able to sit with that and get curious, it can be really incredibly powerful because maybe your body has been saying, oops, something is happening for years, but your mind has been saying, I'm fine, all's good, we're cool, this is normal. And that's where we can continue into cycles and continue down pathways that can eventually stop us in our tracks. It can show up as stress forming into physical ailments such as dis-ease or disease or migraines, or all of a sudden you're off work because your body just completely shuts down, right? We hit that mental, emotional, physical block and we've maxed out. And now we're sitting in a place where we are being forced to sit and listen and digest. So, being capable can become your identity. So here's where I think this all becomes really fascinating. Not that it isn't fascinating before, but this is where we can imagine you might be that child that everyone calls so mature, old soul, so responsible, so helpful, and all of these sound like compliments, and they absolutely can be, and they can be genuine compliments. But imagine receiving that message over and over again while you're simultaneously learning that people need me and I can handle it. I shouldn't make things harder. I'm the one who can fix this. Imagine hearing all these things and learning this at 5, 6, 7, 9, 13. Eventually, capability doesn't just become something you do, it can become something you believe you are. You are the one who puts out the fires in the family. You are the one that is responsible for everyone else's happiness. You are the one that everyone needs. And then suddenly adulthood arrives and you become an individual and a grown adult where resting feels uncomfortable and receiving feels uncomfortable and asking for help feels paralyzing and delegating feels selfish. Letting someone else be disappointed feels unbearable. Because if your identity has been organized around, I am the one who handles all the things, and quite often you see this as the oldest daughter, then not handling these things can strangely feel unsafe. And this is where I want to make the distinction. Sometimes what we call independence, right? I'm an independent adult. That can be great. And it can actually be a brilliant adaptation of I don't need anyone. I can be all these things for everyone else, but I don't need anyone, right? We're deflecting what we need to make everyone else feel comfortable. Because I don't need anyone is depending on people actually has historically felt unsafe. So I'm going to just do it all by myself because I've learned early on that I can't rely on anyone but me to do it. Otherwise, I will be punished or grounded, or I'll have someone roll their eyes at me, or I'll be an annoyance or a burden or all these things. And again, that does not mean that your independence is bad, but it means that we need to become curious about what's underneath our independence. So if you are someone who has grown up being the good girl, that was something that I was labeled a lot as growing up. Oh, she's so responsible. She can handle it. Let me say from experience, your body is going to begin to resist it. For me, this showed up as autoimmune. This showed up as pain. This showed up as controlling things such as food and other ailments in my life. And so because the oldest daughter often doesn't just carry the responsibility psychologically, she may have learned a physical pattern of responsiveness. So when someone asks for something, your mouth says, sure, yes, absolutely, before you've even checked in with yourself. If someone's upset, you immediately move towards fixing. How can I fix this? You don't sit and hold and just be there. It's, I need to fix, 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 fix. And that place of not being able to fix is absolutely uncomfortable. When someone's disappointed, the stomach drops. When someone is angry, you start getting anxious and explaining, over-explaining everything. When someone needs something, you mobilize, you get it done. This is where the fawn response and condition compliance can become useful concepts, not as labels for every woman who says yes, but as a way of understanding how repeated relational experiences can really shape automatic responsiveness. And when we look at the somatic work, I want you to sit and ask yourself, if you find that this is relating to you and you've been here or can kind of feel a familiarization of what I'm saying within your body, maybe take a moment and even jot this down in a journal. Ask yourself, can I notice the moment before the automatic response? Can I notice that pause? This was something when I first started therapy we really worked on, was the pause before the answer. It just meant taking a breath before you answer. In that breath, in that pause before you say yes, no, whatever your answer might be, what do you feel? What is your body showing you? Is there a tightening? Are you holding your breath? Is there a flipping or excitement in your stomach? Is there an urge to fix or explain or make everything okay? Because that tiny space, that tiny pause for the breath to notice and get curious about what you are feeling and what your body's showing you is where choice starts to become possible. And this can sound super easy. I promise you it's not, especially if you have been a people pleaser and continuing to be in fawn and really be that parentified child your entire life, and now you're the adult that's wanting to tend to everyone else. That pause can really throw a wrench in every aspect of your body, mentally, emotionally, physically, even spiritually, dare I say. So take a moment and challenge yourself to start pausing, to notice before you answer and respond. Let me know in the comments too if this is something that you've tried and what has come of it. Drop me a message on Instagram, write me an email. I would love to know how this is working for you. And let's keep going here because we got so much more to cover, because there's also this generational healing piece that we tend to kind of brush over sometimes, or it doesn't get as closely examined. And when I work with clients one-to-one, we do untangling, and that is generational work. And so now we get to widen the lens, because we don't just exist in one straight and narrow line, right? When we look at a family tree, it is called a tree for a reason. It's expansive, and families pass down far more than just eye colors and holiday recipes, traditions, height, all of those things. They pass down beliefs, roles, coping strategies, good or bad, relationship patterns, ways of expressing emotions or suppressing emotions, and ideas of what motherhood, fatherhood, being an auntie looks like, how we sacrifice, and what it means to be a good woman or a good man. And this is where I get to use that word generationally very intentionally, because there's scientific evidence now that really shows how adversity can affect generations through and through. So adversity can have effects that appear across generations, but the mechanisms of how that happens is very complex. So researchers are right now studying biological pathways, including stress, physiology and epigenetic changes alongside much more established relational and environmental pathways. And I want to be careful here in how I word things and how I say things, because we do not have evidence that your grandmother's trauma simply got encoded into your DNA and you inherited her trauma like a genetic file. That's not how it works. We're not putting a floppy disk into you from your grandma. That's not how it's working here. That's, to be very honest, much too simplistic for how this works. Human research has not established yet how trauma comes as a straightforward, deterministic, epigenetic inheritance. What we do have evidence for, though, is a much, in my opinion, much more interesting picture, and it's showing how trauma and adversity can influence how caregivers relate to their children, right? As I'm raising children of my own, I notice in me when they've been at certain ages where I've had major events happen as a child at their age, my body becomes extremely tense and irritable, and I'm moving through almost like a remembrance, almost like a book was reopened of what I experienced at their age in my body, in my mind, in my energetic body, in my emotional, physical, mental bodies. And that to me has shown me how interwoven our generational wounding and trauma is embedded into us. So what we do have evidence for, yes, it's a much more interesting picture, and it's showing that trauma and adversity can very much influence how we as parents relate to our children and what children learn about what relationships look like, how emotions are depicted, what emotions are safe. They get to learn what gets rewarded, what gets punished, right? Good and bad. And they get to learn, what do women do? What do men do? What are the roles? What does love require? And those patterns can move through generations. And so sometimes what you're untangling isn't, my grandmother gave me trauma. It's something happened in the generations before me, and it shaped the way my family learned to survive. And I inherited a set of relational and emotional patterns that I can now become conscious of, rather. So it's very different, and it's much more useful as a conversation to recognize that I wasn't given this, but something happened, and we make it human, and we come forward with compassion. I know in my family lineage, my grandpa was in the war. He was involved in the war against his will, and he escaped multiple times and was taken back as a prisoner of war and was forced to do certain things. And his whole life he spent running. And so my mother would come home from school and her whole home would be packed up and in the car. She wouldn't get to say goodbye to any friends. They'd just pick up and move, because my grandfather lived in fear, in that fight, flight, fawn, or freeze. And that was his solution, was to pick up everything and move. And this happened multiple times as a child for my mother. And so that really shaped what feels safe for her and how she learned what the roles and conditions are to live in this world. And so that influenced how I was brought up. And now it's influencing how my daughter's being brought up and my son's being brought up. And so when I look at what's moving through me, I get to come at that place not as shame and how dare I and I'm such a bad blah, 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 blah. But it's, how can I now untangle this from a place of emotions and rational awareness so that I can move forward, and this perception of how life should be can be much more fruitful and healthy and filled with love and compassion rather than shame and blame and fear and trauma. So when we think about this work in the shamanic lens, This is where my own work gets to move into a different language, because in many shamanic and indigenous traditions, there are frameworks for understanding family lineage, ancestral patterns, relationship with the unseen, and the ways in which an individual can become entangled in patterns larger than themselves. So I use the language of untangling because it gives us a beautiful metaphor. So imagine your family system as a web, and not a web of blame, but a web of relationship, of stories and beliefs and roles and promises, loyalties, fears, and even those unspoken rules. And sometimes you can find yourself living according to a rule you never consciously agreed to. And I'm sure we can all relate to this, right? It could be that children are to be seen and not heard, or women in this family sacrifice, or we don't talk about that, right? We don't talk about Bruno. Or maybe you don't get to leave. Or you hit 18 and you're gone. Washing my hands of you, you're on your own, right? You have to keep the peace. These are all things that arise, these contracts that arise. And in this shamanic lens, we might ask something like, what are you carrying that isn't actually yours? Psychology might phrase this question a little bit differently. It might ask, what beliefs, attachment patterns, family roles, or learned behaviors have you internalized? Whereas somatic work might ask, what does your body still respond, or rather, where does your body still respond as though that old role is still required? So what's showing up in your body and how is it responding to that old role? So we all have different languages. In my work, I get the honor of infusing all three of these. So we choose our own adventure, right? I've referenced this before. It's like a choose your own adventure book. How are you going to best respond in this moment with what's showing up for you in this millisecond? Which pathway are we going to choose to untangle? And so different languages for where we're at, potentially pointing our attention toward the same fundamental inquiry, which is what is mine, what is learned, what was protective, and what am I ready to choose differently? How am I willing and wanting to move forward from here? So this is where that moment of untangling actually begins. And I think we often imagine healing as I'm going to understand my childhood, but really that's intellectualizing it. We can intellectualize and understand until the cows come home, but understanding it isn't always the end. And sometimes the deeper work here is, can I stop reenacting it? Can I stop continuing on this merry-go-round that I've been on? Can I notice when I'm about to overfunction, right? Wear myself thin, and can I take that pause? Can I let someone be disappointed without immediately trying to repair it? Can I ask for help? Whoo, I just got like a flipping in my stomach. Can I ask for help? I don't know. Without feeling like I've failed. Can I rest without feeling like I've earned it? I think that's one that we can all relate to hearing before. So how can you experience someone else's discomfort without making it your own emergency? And that's where, the psychological becomes somatic, because now you're not just thinking that I don't have to take care of everyone. You're teaching your body, I can experience someone else's discomfort and remain connected to myself, because that is a very different experience, right? When we're able to take that pause and notice that we're going to overfunction and then course correct so that we don't. So that can look like having like 14 sports events for your family, your children, and a bunch of work commitments and all the things. And if you keep going, you're going to be burnt out and you're going to get sick, or you're going to get a migraine, or all the things. It's taking that pause. And sometimes that just looks like maybe 20 minutes to yourself, maybe having a bath, maybe going for a walk. Maybe that looks like taking a night off, taking a mental health day. It looks different for everyone. But how can you course correct so that you can experience that possible discomfort that comes with saying, hey, I really need to tend to myself right now so that I can show up better for not just myself, but everyone else, so that I can remain connected to me. And that's something that takes a lot of work sometimes, and it can pack a lot of guilt and a lot of shame because of how we were conditioned and how we grew to believe we should be. So, what the question I have for you is, what is one role you learned to play in your family? So take a pause. What's one role you learned to play in your family? Were you the strong one, the good one, the peacekeeper, caretaker, achiever? Were you the invisible one, the mediator, the troublemaker? What was your role in your family? And then the next thing I'd like you to do is write down or bring into your mind, what did that role give you? What did that role give me? Because every adaptation to a family dynamic has a function. So maybe it gave you belonging, right? The peacekeeper gave you a place of belonging, praise, predictability. Maybe you got connection from being the overachiever, right? You impressed mom, so that gave you that connection with her. She saw you, right? Maybe being the mediator gave you safety, right? Maybe being the troublemaker gave you identity. And then the third thing I'd like you to do is, what is this role costing me now, right? That's a tough one because I find that we don't want to blame anyone else. And that's not what we're doing here. We're not blaming, saying, you cost me this. It's taking an honest look, an inventory of your life, and asking yourself, where am I over-functioning? Where am I exhausted? Where am I unable to receive? Maybe it's as simple as a compliment. And instead of saying, oh, thanks, I got it from the thrift store, it was like $3 and da-da-da-da-da-da. Maybe instead of saying that, we just say thank you. Where are you abandoning yourself? So taking those steps, finding out, what role did you learn to play in your family? What did that role give me? And what is that role costing me now? Are the first 3 steps. I've included 2 more steps in the show notes that I'd like you to complete if you have the time, if you feel aligned. And, if you're still listening, if you're still clocked into this podcast and thinking, holy shit, that's me, I can relate to these whole, wow, what Sarah's saying really resonates, then I want you to know that you do not need to fix yourself. You don't. And I think a lot of the healing community in the past has been, let's heal you, let's fix you, you need to No, that's not what we're doing here. What we're doing is recognizing patterns that have been developed for reasons. They have helped you navigate something. They have helped you stay safe. They have added to your strength, and your strength is not the problem here. Your empathy is not the problem. Your competence is not the problem. The question is whether those qualities are still choices that you are actively making, or if they've become obligations. Because you can still be the woman or person who cares deeply and still be generous and intuitive and outgoing and strong, but you don't have to carry everyone else in your world to prove that you love them. You don't have to disappear and shrink and dim your light to keep the peace. You don't have to earn your place by being useful. And you definitely do not have to remain loyal to an old survival strategy simply because it once kept you safe. Because untangling is not about becoming less of who you are. It's learning to separate what is yours, putting that in a bucket, putting what was learned in another bucket, what was protective in another, what was inherited, and what belongs in the past, and what you can consciously choose to carry forward. There's great traits and great things and lessons that you've learned, and you can carry them forward, but making the choice to do so. And maybe the deepest form of healing isn't becoming the person who can handle everything. Maybe it's becoming the person who finally knows, I don't have to. I don't have to go if I don't want to, and that's okay. They'll still love me. They'll still be there for me. And if they're not, then that's a whole other bucket of worms. But come back to your body. Get curious about the pattern and ask yourself, is this me, or is this something I learned I had to be? And that, my friends, is where the untangling begins. And if this podcast resonated, please leave a 5-star review, give a share, subscribe, because this helps get the message and the work to others who might be longing for understanding, for connection, who might feel so alone and vulnerable, who are at their end of the rope. And this just might be that lifeline for them. If anything I said resonates and you want to go deeper, I offer one-to-one sessions as well as some group classes. So check out my website, www.healingwithsarah.ca. I also see clients internationally via Zoom, so feel free to check that out. I would be honored to work with you. I offer free consultation calls as well. So happy listening. I hope you have the beautiful rest of your day or your evening, and don't forget to take care of yourself.